What's going on, y'all? It's JD and James back with another live stream. Haven't been running lives in a while, but back, and we just wanted to chop it up with you guys. Honestly, catch up with each other. We haven't really talked as much in the past, I don't know, say a month and a half, couple months or whatever. Just been busy. I know I've been busy on my end. I know James has been busy on his end. A lot of different changes going on right now. The season is changing right now. I believe like life seasons are changing right now, shifting focus, and let's chop it up about it. So I would say number one, for everybody, the season is changing just in terms of I feel like it's more of a transition from fall to winter. And with that transition, a lot of times, a lot of things can change as far as like your environment. Maybe the calisthenics park isn't where you want to go work out anymore. Maybe you want to come inside and do a little bit of working out. Maybe you are changing your focus as far as what your workouts are. I know for me, I actually was the past month and a half, I was really focused on a lot of weighted calisthenics. And I wanted to do that until the end of the year, but naturally the body kind of tells us what to do. And naturally the seasons can kind of dictate where our training might go or where our focus might go. And I feel like I'm at a pivotal point right now, like transitioning from November to December. And now I'm kind of like refocusing on a few different things. Number one, I had an injury that kept me away from running for about 5 months, and I've been able to start back running about the past couple months. And now I'm really like looking forward to like focusing on that a little bit more and what that does for me. Another thing is, for me, I've had a little bit of a transition as far as season changing, just in terms of getting used to this new environment of living in San Francisco. And, I was real excited about living out here. And there was a lot of stuff going on. There's a lot of external stimulation. But one good thing about winter and things getting a little bit colder, you're not as tempted to go outside and do all the fun stuff and enjoy the weather and feel like, oh, I can't pass up, oh, the temperature is 75 degrees today, is perfect outside, I gotta go out there. Winter kind of forces us to kind of stay inside and maybe focus on a few things that maybe we've been neglecting for a while because we've been out having fun during summer and fall and in those seasons. But James, I know you got a couple transitions that you're going through right now. One of them being moving from Arizona to Phoenix to Seattle. So what's going on with you?
Yeah, man, it's interesting. There's a lot of new things changing. I mean, it's funny you mentioned too, going through an injury and then now getting back into it. I've been kind of the same way. My back has been feeling a lot better, so been hitting the legs a bit more in the gym, and it's kind of fun to see that new growth or regrowth and how much faster it kind of comes when it's the beginning of it. And then ended up snagging a new job out in Seattle, so ended up getting a gig with Amazon, so ended up making the move. So I'll be out there this month, so in probably 3 weeks or so. And yeah, it's funny because I feel like we always see like whenever the season shifts, that's always like at the beginning of a new season is the most massive growth period. It's like you get this new stimulus that you haven't experienced before, and then your body's like uncomfortable at first, so it has to adapt, and that's where you get like that max growth period. So I'm pretty stoked to try a new city. I've never even been there before, so moving there sight unseen. But yeah, I'm stoked to see what it has to offer.
Yeah, Seattle's a dope city. I like that spot. I've actually spent a good amount of time out in Seattle. But actually, I wanted to touch on something that you just said, which is the regrowth part. And, it's funny because just like you said that you kind of, I don't know how long you've been back, kind of hitting the leg since your back's been feeling better. But for me, I've been back running for about 6 weeks now. And I've been making some substantial progress. But my main issue right now is trying to hold myself back from not trying to do things too fast. And, one of the things I think that has to do with the regrowth process being so much faster than the initial growth process. Number one is muscle memory. But I think maybe the bigger portion of it is the fact that we don't have that ceiling, that we don't have those mental limitations when it comes down to certain things. If we've been someplace before, then we know that we can get back there. You know what I mean? So for me, when it comes down to running, it's like, for me, a half a marathon is just like something I know I can do. I've done it a few times. So when it comes down to running these little 5 mile runs, 6 mile runs, and yesterday I ran a 7 mile run for the first time in a minute, it didn't really feel like anything too crazy. It just felt like I need to stop myself at 7 miles because I know I don't want to progress too fast and re-injure myself. Opposed to before, it's like when I had never ran a 7 mile run before, mentally it was this big hurdle to even get to that 7 miles. Versus, and same thing probably for you with a lot of these weightlifting goals that you might have. To get to a certain place, there was like almost this cannot do it factor, versus now there's almost like, should I do it?
Man, no, 1,000%. I feel like it's like I'm going through the exact same thing. Like the numbers, it doesn't feel as shiny. It's like it's a completely different thing. I guess like when your training age goes up, like if you're like, I do kind of miss that, being kind of new to things. And it's like, you're like, oh, can my body even, possibly make that happen? And, to me, it's a completely different mindset because it's like, when you've already been there, it's like, oh, your body's capable of getting there. It's just now you're like, okay, do I have the discipline, to, slowly keep increasing that load and not just, because we kind of have that same mentality as like, you taste blood, you just want to, attack. Like, that's how I feel. Like I've probably gotten back into, hitting legs, probably, 5 different times, and I'd always get re-injured because, one day I'd show up, I'd feel super strong, and I would just, take a massive jump, slap another plate on the bar, and then, re-injure myself, and then, I'd have to go back to square one. So it's interesting. It's like a completely different, it's like pushing your mind to the limit versus disciplining your mind. And, how can you actually hold yourself back from, trying to just reach that goal tomorrow versus, creating those sustainable progress that's going to last, the rest of our life.
Yeah. And on top of that, when it comes down to like, I feel like a lot of these processes where we're trying to, I wouldn't even say get to a certain destination, but grow in a certain point, grow in a certain way, we tend to naturally want to go as fast as possible, when faster doesn't always necessarily equate to better. And, rushing the process on a lot of things. I've actually been dealing with this in my personal life as well, as far as like rushing the process on things, or, looking to have X, Y, and Z. It's like you're looking for this result in life versus just kind of taking things for what they are, and taking things, like I would say, like dating is pretty much, it's kind of one of those things. It's like, you know, it's interesting because in some ways I'm more so like on a type of time where I'm not necessarily looking for anything super serious, but then you're just like, I also don't like the whole filtering out process of like dating. But at the end of the day, it's like that's just a part of the process that comes along with the territory. And it's one thing I actually did want to talk about on this live stream, which is something that you've said before, and you've used this analogy when it comes down to dating, but this analogy really holds true in every aspect of life, because I've kind of been dealing with this in a few different ways. So with the aspect, I had to get off of those dating apps because it just comes too easy. There's too much of like it's like basically nonstop funnel of women coming in your way, and it makes you way more passive in real life when it comes down to like actually interacting with people in a genuine and authentic way, because you feel like, oh, I don't really need to talk to anybody. I already have like a million matches on the dating app or whatever. Another way I've kind of been dealing with that is through work, which is funny because when I first got to my new gig and I started training people, I was super hungry. So, there's a couple different ways that you can get you can get clients at a gym when you're a personal trainer. There's multiple different ways, but I'll probably say the two main ways that you can get clients is through just going around speaking to people at the gym, kind of like if you were out, a single guy out, speaking to different women, right? And then there's another way where there's membership associates who kind of funnel you potential clients. And, the more you kind of ingratiate yourself with the membership associates, or they see that you're a, proficient personal trainer, that you can speak to people, that you can sell, they're going to funnel you more clients your way. And for me, when I first got to the gym, I was all about like talking to people and trying to make sure I get my own clients, essentially hunting for my own food, like in your words, James. But then I started getting a little bit comfortable just because I was like, oh, well, shit, these membership associates, they just keep on sending me more and more clients. I don't even need to talk to people in the gym anymore. But, there's always like a rhythm to things in life, whether it's at work, whether it's in your personal life, whether it's in the gym, whatever it may be. And sometimes things are going to take a dip naturally. So when the membership associates aren't getting as many people coming in to sign up for memberships, you're probably not going to get as many clients funneled your way as well. And if you haven't been hunting for your own food, then things might slow down for you in terms of like getting new clients. And that's what I kind of went through maybe a couple weeks ago. And it kind of woke me up a little bit to the point where I was like, okay, I need to start hunting for my own food again. And I think there's always going to be a rhythm in life where we kind of maybe get to a certain place and then we start getting comfortable. And the moment that we start getting comfortable, I feel like is the moment that we start taking that dip. And it's a super important rhythm.
Man, 1,000%. Like, it's actually funny, my cousin recently switched careers and he got into sales, into medical sales. And it's so funny. I gave him that advice. I was like, look, you're going to have a month where, like you're just killing it. And I'm like, it's going to feel like, a lot of money for you. I'm like, you might be making, 15K, 20K, 25K. And I was like, the biggest mistake I made in real estate sales was like, it's like you see this, massive amount of money come in and you almost think I actually like the thermostat analogy. So if you have a thermostat, like a financial thermostat of where you're comfortable, say, 100K a year is your thermostat. And it's like, if you're under 100K, it's like you're, running, million miles an hour, you're exhausted every single lead, talking to everyone or whatever. And then say a month comes in where it's like you're projected as like, if I keep this up, I'm going to be at 350K for the year. Then it's like your thermostat's like, no, we need to cool this down. Like, you don't have to keep hunting. Like, that's too much. Like, and it seems like counterintuitive, right? Like, obviously, more is better, but it's so funny. I mean, even I think of times, I guess like your example, dating when you're single, it's like, every process, I guess you could say in, sales or whatever you want to call this process is, you plant a seed, you water a seed, and then at some point in the future, there's a harvest. And it might continue, say, for example, you get a client and then they keep booking training sessions with you. It's like, and then the longer you do it, right, the roots get stronger and you kind of have that relationship. But, when it's an abundant season, we always forget about the first part of the process is the planting the seeds. And so what happens a lot of times is like, when we're, I guess you could call it in scarcity, it's like we're planting, seeds, we're watering, we're, doing all these things in the early part of the process. And then it's like this tidal wave of abundance comes in and it, our thermostat is like, oh, we can cool it down. We're good. We're set. We're on autopilot now. We're on the highway. Like, and then inevitably, either some of those don't stick or whatever. And then it, dries up slightly. And then we kind of start that process where we have to keep planting the seeds. But it's so funny. That's kind of what, to tie back into the 7 days a week mindset is basically the solution for it, right? If you have a 7 days a week of I plant seeds 7 days a week. I don't care if it's harvest, I don't care if I'm in the desert, it's raining, snowing. I plant seeds 7 days a week, and I just keep watering. I just keep following that process. Then it's like, the harvest and stuff that'll all work itself out. But I feel like when we don't have like a routine of seed planting, that's when it's kind of easy, where we kind of just go with like, the ebbs and flows.
Yeah. To add on to that, I would say we're always moving. Our life moves in a rhythm. So, and I think no matter if we get comfortable or even if we're doing a 7 days per week seed planting, I think what the 7 days per week, the most important aspect of it is that when we do have dips, the dips they're not as deep of a valley as it would be if we're maybe kind of sporadically planting seeds, 3 days a week, 4 days a week here and there. So I really think that the 7 days per week keeps us closer to our baseline. And in life in general, you're going to have highs, you're going to have lows, but the main thing is you want to stay as close to like a nice foundational baseline as possible. You could honestly, I look at it the same way as like, for instance, like a toxic relationship. So most of these toxic relationships that you see, the reason why people end up staying in these toxic relationships is because the highs are really high, but then the lows are really low. It's almost like this roller coaster ride that people are going on, opposed to like a relationship that's a little bit more stable, where people kind of, you have little dips here and there, and then you also have high points as well, but it's not like anything too crazy. But you're not necessarily looking for that excitement. And also, I think about it in training as well, because I know you've probably experienced this as well. I think this is just human nature. We might be gunning for a specific movement, or we might be gunning for a PR for, months and months and months. When you hit that PR, when you hit that certain movement, like it's almost inevitable that you're going to take your foot off the gas just a little bit. You know what I mean? And for somebody who maybe doesn't have a 7 days per week mindset, or somebody who doesn't have a consistent training mindset at all, they're liable to like take a week off or 2 weeks off, or just kind of like forget about training in general till they fall off really hard. And then they need to get back. And it's like a pronounced, like a steep drop off or a steep dip. But for somebody who has more of a 7 days per week mindset, it's going to be more so, yeah, you might take a little step back, or in the step back might be that you're not progressing as fast as you were when you were gunning super hard for that goal. And eventually you're going to figure out like, okay, I'm in somewhat of a little plateau. It's time to go hard again. It's time to put my foot back on the gas. And that typically is more so the dip that you're going to have on a 7 days per week schedule than you are when you're on more of like a sporadic training schedule, or maybe like a 3, 4, 5 days per week schedule.
Man, no, 1,000%. And it's kind of funny. I think I messaged you this like, yeah, maybe a couple months ago or maybe a month ago. But man, I went through like COVID and, dealt with a couple of, not too bad sicknesses. But it's funny, like early in my training journey, I remember like, I'd get sick and it's like my performance would like tank. And now it's like, I feel like, even on like my worst day of a sickness, it's like my performance is like only, slightly dipping from peaks. And I think, like you mentioned, it's like with the 7 day mentality, it's like a big part of it too is the valleys become much higher. It's like, the peaks definitely increase at a great rate, but then the valleys also come up with it. And, versus kind of that sporadic mindset where it's like, oh, you're, hitting tons of PRs, and then it's like you fall off and you're like, you go from being, shredded to looking like you don't even work out to, these crazy, peaks and valleys. And yeah, it's kind of funny too, from like a relationship standpoint, like you mentioned, like that's kind of is like a toxic relationship, the, inconsistent, where it's like, you have like these highs that are like, heroin shots, and then, lows that is, devastating. And it's kind of funny. It's like, I think people do have almost like an addiction to that kind of, I guess you could call it even drama, even in terms of like, you know, training, your career. You could be addicted to like falling off and then, you know, sprinting a million miles an hour to get everything back together, and then, you know, falling off again and then sprinting, versus just like having that consistent mindset of like, you know, having that slow, consistent progress that just keeps compounding on itself over years, versus that, you know, kind of like gambler's approach to life.
Yeah, I think you could almost say that some people have more of a toxic relationship with themselves. Like if you're the person who's very sporadic when it comes down to putting in work on your craft, or you're somebody who's not very consistent when it comes down to doing a lot of the things that you need to do in life, that is pretty much a toxic relationship with yourself, because sometimes you'll give yourself what you need and it feels really, really good. But then other times, you're falling off the wagon. Maybe you're, whatever your vices are, you're giving into it. And, there's always going to be a certain element of that in life, but it depends on how much you give into your vices and how much that you actually fall off, or how consistent you are when it comes down to giving yourself the things that you need in life, which is definitely, honestly, I think that since we're on the topic of seasons, I think wintertime is actually probably one of the better seasons to really start rewarding yourself and giving yourself the things that you need to do, because holiday season, I would say you can have like a lot of distractions, but at the end of the day, it's like, at least for me, one of the things that I've noticed, even just in the last couple of weeks, is that I started giving myself more time. And when you give yourself more time, it just opens up a ton of possibilities, and it opens up, as far as like mental health goes. For instance, I stopped making YouTube videos for a while. I stopped writing for a while. I stopped doing a lot of the things that were like practices that initially when I started doing them, they were therapeutic for me. But, once I started, the YouTube thing, I kind of got burnt out of, but I forgot that it was therapeutic. And then I went back to this past week. I probably made like 3 videos. I haven't published them yet, but I forgot how therapeutic it is to like express myself, or how therapeutic it is to like process my thoughts on pen and paper in terms of writing and different things like that. So when you actually give yourself time and you kind of maybe shut the world out a little bit, a lot of times you can find these practices. And, life, and, for me, living in a big city is very distracting, and it's distracting in a good way sometimes. But at the same time, I think the way that we can keep things in balance is actually giving ourselves that time. And wintertime is a perfect time to do it. It's colder outside, probably not going to be wanting to hang out as much, depending on where you're living. James is in Arizona right now. That's probably when people start to go out and hang out a little bit more. But if you're in a colder city, say, for instance, you're in New York, Boston, San Francisco, Seattle, it's starting to get colder outside. So people are probably staying in a little bit more. And that's actually a good thing for us. And, what you need to do in this time is figure out, how can I create my home space to be basically like a dojo, basically like a sanctuary for my own personal growth, whether that be physical growth, whether that be mental growth, whether it be developing a skill set, whatever it is that you're working on.
And 100%. And, one thing I did also want to kind of talk about when it comes to kind of improving at a craft. One thing I've been kind of realizing lately, and like how a lot of people learn is, because I've been trying to teach a bit more, and this is, related to programming, and, I've been trying to teach people how. And one thing I notice is a lot of people are kind of conditioned to be basically need external motivator. Say, for instance, a teacher that grades. You go to a college course and you study something, and I think something people struggle with a lot, and this relates to like fitness, and we talked about this a lot too, is almost people thinking that if you're doing something and other people don't see it, it's not going to count. So to me, when I think of wintertime, I think of working hard in silence and not needing other people to see the work that you're putting in. So like for instance, right, when you think of like being outside during summer, it's a very, visible time. And then when I think of winter, I think of it as like, you're kind of confined. Other people aren't going to be seeing the work that we put in. And a lot of times the work we put into ourselves, nobody's going to know like whether or not, you're, scrolling Instagram, scrolling TikTok, or whether, you're reading a book or you're doing research on something at night. But, over the long run, all that, bit of work that we put in silence, it always pays off. And I think we have to kind of get evidence of that, in our life before we actually truly start to believe that. Because, I'm sure you've experienced that too, like when you're younger. Because when you're a kid, it's like it's very hard to almost believe that these, seeds we plant in silence are actually gonna, bear us, a harvest in the future. And kind of learning to trust that kind of working in silence process, to me, that's like the perfect wintertime kind of thing. So it's like, picking up those, habits that you're going to be doing maybe inside in silence, like you said, whether it's writing, being creative, studying, making videos, maybe you're creating music, you're harnessing some kind of craft that you're building up.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I wouldn't even say that's even something that's just a difficult thing for kids or young adults to kind of have faith in. I think that's something that's difficult for everybody. I think what it could be is that there might be different aspects of your life that you maybe, like, for instance, let's just say, for instance, fitness or whatever, right? You've already been down this path. You're currently at a high level in this journey, in your fitness journey. So for you, when it comes down to like, okay, let me block out all the distractions, let me work on this fitness stuff, and I'm gonna get laser focused on it. You already know that you can get to a high level in that. When it comes down to studying for, programming, or getting yourself to an even higher level of programming, you're like, hey, look, I just got this job that I've been wanting to get with Amazon, but I want to level up even more. And the way for me to level up even more is to like block out all of the distractions, create this sanctuary for myself where I can study, where I can practice, where I can do all these things that are going to be beneficial to, this goal that I have ahead of myself. You already been down that road before, so you know it works. But then there's other areas of your life, I don't know what those areas are that maybe you don't have as much confidence in. But you still have to take those same principles and you still have to apply them to that area of your life where that journey and that pathway is a pathway to the unknown because you've never been there before. So for, everybody out there, for some of you guys out there, that pathway is for fitness. Or maybe that some of you guys out there, maybe that pathway is for studying, or maybe that pathway is getting into a relationship and, getting over some of your traumatic issues that you've, experienced in the past when it comes down to relationships or, some stuff that might have happened to you in your childhood or whatever. But at the end of the day, it's like spending time in creating an environment for yourself that's conducive for your goals is going to be extremely important during the wintertime. I mean, it's really important anytime, to be honest with you. There's so many different ways that we can create that environment and that we can kind of do our work in the dark, so to speak. One of the ways that I did it recently was that I like got off Instagram for a while. And for me, I wouldn't even say I was like one of these people who's super active and posting on Instagram anyways, but at the same time, not seeing everybody else on Instagram made me feel like I was more secluded and made me feel like I was kind of away from everybody else and I was doing more work on myself. So I think that there can be different ways of doing it. It could be you that you're physically putting yourself in, locking yourself in the house and, reading and writing and doing creative work, and maybe you have a set of parallettes in your house and a pull-up bar and you're doing all these things and this is your sanctuary. Or it could just be like you're not hanging out with a lot of the people who you've been hanging out with. You're not going out for drinks. You're not going to the gym. You're going to the park. There's so many different ways that you can do that. And, let me just holler at Tim real quick. Tim says he's checking in. James and JD, what's going on? How you doing, Tim? Tim, I see you putting in major, man. You know what the crazy thing? Every time I see Tim on YouTube, his physique gets better and better and better. And this man is 68 years old, which is crazy. It's like a lot of people think that they're too old when they're like 25 years old or 30 years old or 35 years old to make progress and make gains. But every time I watch Tim on YouTube, I literally was just looking at a video of him doing like some type of 30-day challenge the other day. And his physique is phenomenal. His range of motion on his pull-ups and his dips and all his exercises is improving every time I watch him. And it's like 68 years old with a limitless mentality. That's a beautiful thing. That's something I hope to have at that age as well. And Tim says training or focusing alone, being your own cheerleader, for sure. Definitely, it's important to be your own cheerleader. And it's important to not necessarily need that external validation all the time, which is something I think that we all can struggle with. I don't think anybody's exempt from liking external validation. I think we all like it. It's a natural thing to make us feel good. Depending on how big your ego is, you probably like even more external validation, to be completely honest with you, because the ego soaks that up. So, and let's shifting gears is, this is a topic I actually wanted to talk about while we're on this live today. And it also has to do with environment. And mainly I want to talk about this because I actually created a video about this the other day. I think I made a quick little video about it, but essentially what I was talking about was that, I've lived in a ton of different environments. And, one of the things I brought up, and it's literally every time I tell somebody how much I've traveled or that I've lived in different countries or that I've traveled to over 30 different countries, literally the first question that comes out of everybody's mouth is, what's your favorite place? What's your favorite place in the world? And I don't ever really have an answer for that because there's always two sides to every coin. And, every environment, whether you think it's let's just say, for instance, you're somebody who loves to be in lush green environments. If you go to the desert, you're probably not going to like it out there because there's not a lot of trees. There's not a lot of like green. There's not, it's probably just not your environment. But every single environment has its pros and has its cons. So we can look at, for instance, James is getting ready to change environments. He's going to go someplace that's not completely different, same country, somewhat same culture. I would say actually Arizona and Seattle probably have a very different culture, to be completely honest, as far as like American culture goes, because Northwest is like very, very liberal, like super liberal. And then Arizona tends to be, I think it tends to be more of a conservative state. I'm not exactly sure, but there's just going to be a different culture change. But there's going to be pros to living in the Northwest. And then there's pros to living in Arizona as well. So basically, my point of this whole environment thing is that we need to take whatever that environment offers and hyper focus on what the positives are in the environment and kind of leave all the other bullshit to the side. And also don't let yourself get caught up in the other bullshit as well. For instance, like I came out to San Francisco, there's literally a ton of pros about living in this place. So there's tons of opportunity. This is like one of the financial hubs of the world. So there's tons of money here. So if you're somebody who's looking to, expand financially, if you're looking for opportunities to make money, if you're looking to open up a business, if you're in tech and you want to rub shoulders with certain people, this is going to be a great place to be. But there's also a lot of negatives that come along with being in a big city. Number one, a lot of distractions. And there's also going to be a lot of things that you might not like so much about a place like San Francisco. For instance, maybe some of the political leanings or maybe the mindset that certain people have here might not be for you. But if you can focus on what you came here for the mission at hand, you're gonna not get so frustrated with all the other elements of the environment that you don't necessarily care for. So these are the things that we kind of need to focus on. And it's granted, it's always going to be easier said than done, but at the same time, you just kind of have to put checks and balances in your life to remind yourself when you're getting off track or maybe when you're getting distracted or certain things like that. From a fitness standpoint, it could be, okay, I'm gonna let myself enjoy this environment a little bit. Maybe I'm gonna take my foot off the gas with my diet or whatever. But then you might start looking in the mirror. You might still look good, but at the same time, you're like, I don't look the way I normally look. It's time to like really hyper focus on my diet. It's time to really zero in on my training. It's time to make sure that I'm like refocusing and making sure that I'm dictating what this environment. I'm creating my own environment versus letting the environment dictate who I am.
And it's interesting too. You mentioned the pros and cons because I feel like every single environment I've been in, I feel like when I'm there, there's always stuff I take for granted. And then a lot of times it doesn't even show up until after you leave. The things that you were taking for granted. It's like, when I'm, in Arizona, I think back to, different things that, Hawaii had. And, when I was in Norway, I was thinking of, different comforts we had, here in the States. But then, when you come back, you think of, oh, all these things that, Europe had that, would be nice here. And a lot of times we do have to remind ourselves to like, just focus on the absolute best that the environment has to offer. It's like, like we said, if you're near a nice body of water, you might want to enjoy the seafood in that environment. If you're more at a place that has nice, farms, you might be enjoying a nice steak and, kind of really getting the best out of, every environment we have to offer. And it's also interesting too, thinking about different like cultures, because I think that's definitely a big one. Like for example, Arizona, I'm very curious to see the difference between like, Scottsdale versus, Seattle, because, Scottsdale is kind of known as like a wealthy spot in Arizona, right? You've got a lot of wealth. But, same with Seattle, but it comes from different sources. So, Seattle's wealth, a majority of it comes from tech. And, Arizona or Scottsdale, I'll be honest, I don't even, know where the wealth comes from. I think it comes from, California, selling California houses and moving here. But, it's just interesting, like different industry and like, capitalizing on these different hubs that are, doing what you're trying to excel at. And it's funny too, like when you move somewhere, right? I'm sure everyone's like, oh my God, the cost of living in San Francisco is insane. But if you step back and you're like, oh, why is the cost of living high? Oh, well, because, there's a lot of demand because a lot of people there make a lot of money. So the thing is, like all these places where, the cost of living is insane, it's insane because the economy there is booming. There's so much wealth in those spots that you're basically having to compete for resources with all these other people that are bringing in a lot of money. And, there's just so much opportunity in those spots. And it's just so funny that like, I even got it too. Like, for example, I told some coworkers at, one of the places I'm leaving, and they're like, oh, what's the cost of living like? And, to me, it was kind of hilarious because I'm thinking, I'm like, well, one gig's paying, over 3 times as much as the other. And, they're worried about, okay, you're going to spend, 40% more on coffee. Like, oh my God, you're going to have to pay $10 for a cup of coffee. And I'm like, well, who am I going to be drinking the coffee with? Like, who's going to be at the table next to me? Is it going to be, angel investor? Is it going to be, you know, multi-billionaire next to me at the coffee shop? Or is it going to be, you know, someone that works in, I don't know what the industry is here in Arizona, to be honest.
Yeah,
But
Chipotle.
I don't know, man. There's a lot of money here, but I
No, no,
honestly don't know where.
I'm just talking shit. Yeah, but I'm just saying it could be that it could be the contrast could be that stark. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with working at Chipotle if you're working your way up, but at the same time, the same thing here. It's like you can be in this environment and you just have way more access to things that can be beneficial to you. And dude, there's nothing wrong with living in a slower paced city. To be honest with you, I think it's a beautiful thing. I just got back from Maine. I was in Maine visiting my mom. I was in Portland, Maine. Slow city, but it's something special about that place. I love Maine. And, you know, I had a great time while I was out there, but it also gave me a lot of perspective about coming back to San Francisco. And honestly, it gave me a lot of perspective on a lot of the good and a lot of the bad because I just kind of sometimes when you get so entrenched in an environment, you almost don't even really realize what's going on because you're just become a part of the environment and you're kind of making your way through the environment and it kind of blocks out your perspective. It's hard to kind of take that step back and kind of see what you're looking at versus when you completely remove yourself from the environment and then you come back in, then you're like, oh, okay, this is what I need to be focusing on. This is what I need to be leaving alone. This is what I need to be. And that's kind of what the perspective was for me. And honestly, I think that's going to be something that I do from here on out. I haven't left San Francisco. I've been living here for 5 months. I didn't leave basically almost even leave the city for 5 months. The furthest place I've really even been was to Oakland just to go visit my dad at my dad's house, which is, if you guys are familiar with the Bay Area, to get from San Francisco to Oakland is literally just one side of the bridge to the other. Granted, from where I live to where my dad lives is like an hour, but at the same or 45 minutes or something like that. But essentially you can get from Oakland to San Francisco in 5 minutes. So I haven't really been going anywhere. So my perspective has just been only Bay Area. And it's good to step back and kind of see things from a different angle. And from here on out, I think even if it's just take a little quick trip to LA here or maybe go visit James up in Seattle, I'm going to need to do that every couple months. I'm going to need to take a weekend trip every couple months and just kind of reframe my focus and reframe my perspective because, you know, when it comes down to environments, another thing that's important is not letting yourself, not letting, I've kind of spoke on this earlier, but not letting the environment dictate who you are. And there might be some of you guys out there who might be living in an environment that's not necessarily the best one. Say, for instance, you come from a super low income area and you know you're watching this video and you're 18 years old and you live in an area that's filled with crime and drugs and people who are, you know, because a lot of times when you're in these desolate places like that, it kind of brings out the worst in human nature. And because people are fighting over scraps, it kind of brings out the worst in people. So how do you maybe you can't leave that environment right now. But the thing is that environment doesn't have to turn you into a criminal, or it doesn't have to turn you into somebody who's shady, or it doesn't have to turn you into somebody who, you know, acts like somebody who's from that environment. You can still work on yourself and you can still grow and be in a certain environment. Similar to being in an area like San Francisco, I would say maybe it's not about that type of struggle, but your struggle might be more so, okay, I live in an environment that's all about money, right? Money is a good thing, it's a tool. So I want to get as much of it as I can. But I also see by living in San Francisco what money and what comfort can actually do to people. It can turn people into, it can make people soft, number one, which is one of the main things that I see about a lot of people in San Francisco. It's a lot of soft people here. It can make people very superficial. And, you know, people here, I would say on average, maybe tend to lack a little bit of depth in some areas of their mindset. So how do I, you know, take advantage of certain aspects, and how do I just live here? I can live in San Francisco and be here for, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, however many years I need to be here to, you know, accomplish what I want to accomplish here. And how do I let that, how do I not let this environment change me in the ways that I don't want to be changed? So this is going to be another thing, another kind of struggle that we all go through in general. Because being in certain environments, you're going to change anyways. I mean, it's just the laws of nature. If you're in a certain environment, you're going to change. Same thing with species. If just like in the Galapagos Island, they have all those animals that are, have all those, what do they call it? It's what do they call that thing when it's not evolution, but it's natural selection. It's like essentially natural selection basically means this is over a period of time, but we do it in a smaller way as well, in like a kind of a more micro way as well with ourselves. But natural selection basically means that the environment kind of dictates how that species moves forward. Like, say, for instance, there's a certain characteristic on an animal that needs to change. Over time, the characteristics of the animal changes, and they saw that with a lot of those animals out in the Galapagos Islands. Same thing with ourselves. It's just like you can go from living in a super cold weather place to going to move to Hawaii. One thing that I can guarantee that's going to happen to your body when you move from, let's just say, Norway to Hawaii is that, number one, you're going to get tanner. Number two, you're going to get leaner because it's going to be hotter all the time. You're probably not going to have as much of an appetite. You're going to be sweating more. You're going to, you know what I mean? Then your body's going to adjust. Your internal temperature is going to adjust to the point where when you're out in 85-degree weather, you're not sweating all day. But maybe the first week that you were in Hawaii, you're going to be sweating profusely and needing to take 3-4 showers a day because you're just not used to that environment. So our body adapts. Our mind adapts to environments as well. So there's something that is really important to, not adapt, maybe to be cognizant of the fact that our body is adapting, and be cognizant of the fact that our mindset might be adapting, and that our morals and our, philosophy, our own personal philosophy might be adapting as well. But you just need to take inventory of it and kind of just make sure that you keep yourself in check.
And I got to ask you, so, going to Maine, like, what are the kind of, when you see, San Francisco from like a outside perspective, like, what do you think, like, I guess your biggest takeaway from, like, it's kind of like going, like you said, kind of getting caught up in the void of like becoming part of it. What's like your big kind of insight you got?
I would say, like, number one, I would say people in San Francisco are very privileged, and a lot of people here have a lot of resources. And when it comes down to people who have a lot of resources, they tend to want things without putting in the work for it because they feel like they can just buy things, or they feel like their status will give them certain things. And when I went back to Maine, one of the first things I did was go back to that Foley's Fitness gym. And like, Portland, Maine, it's like, it's like a kind of a blue collar type of spot. And especially when you go into that gym, it's a really nice gym, but you kind of get like those blue collar vibes of just people who are just going in there, putting in work. I could just imagine a lot of guys coming in there with like these little flannel jackets on, just putting those up in the locker room and then just going into the gym and just lifting. You know what I mean? Versus the difference between some people who come from the financial district in San Francisco who take off a suit and go into the Equinox and they're just want to get on machines. You know what I mean? Or they're like, oh, well, let me take a class so somebody can like tell me what to do. I can just kind of follow along. And like, I'm not really that serious about fitness. I just want to do the bare minimum because I'm so focused on all this other aspect of my life that I'm not like, I don't have any grit in me. You know what I mean? And there's a lot of people in San Francisco who don't really have any grit. And it's funny because, man, honestly, I was training this guy one day, and this dude was literally about the same size as me. And the funny thing is, out here in San Francisco, San Francisco gets a bad rap in a lot of ways. They always say San Francisco is filled with crime and drugs and all this other type of stuff. Really, that's just one little pocket called a Tenderloin in like downtown. There's a few different places that have like a lot of crime, but if you stay away from those places, you're pretty much like, honestly, it's probably one of the safer places you could be. But I ended up training this guy one day, and this dude was bigger than me. I mean, he was about the same height, this dude had a ton of muscle mass on him. He's like 6 feet tall, same height as me, except he was like 205 pounds, big dude. And one day I was like talking to him, just kind of, when you're a personal trainer, you just kind of talk to people about their personal lives. And I was kind of asking him what he thought about San Francisco. And this is a black dude, same, like, and which is like what threw me off even more. And he was just like, yeah, I don't really feel safe here sometimes. I'm just thinking to myself, I'm like, dude, you're 6 feet tall, 205-pound, muscle bound dude. And you're talking about you don't feel safe in San Francisco? And I'm just thinking to myself, I'm like, dude, I never in my life feel unsafe in this city. I could literally be walking around in the worst neighborhood with all the drug addicts in the Tenderloin. I just literally was just down there this morning because there's a little bakery I like to go to down there. And I never feel unsafe. I never feel unsafe. But I feel like when you have too much privilege and you're like too caught up in like living in a certain lifestyle, you start to feel it just makes you soft. Like I think it just makes you soft. And I think a lot of people in this city are soft, not just on a physical safety level, but mentally as well. Because when you have too many spoils and you have too many luxuries, it tends to do something to your psyche. And you want more and more and more of that, opposed to being okay with having less and just working with what you got. And I think about a lot of my clients who are, millionaires and, doing really well for themselves. And the funny thing is the ones who tend to have the most money, I feel like, are the ones who have they're the ones who are like needing to talk to their therapist all the time. And they need to, they're always going through all these personal problems because, like they say, more money, more problems. Because you have too much stuff and you have too many expectations in life. So if you can lower your expectations in certain ways, I think that's actually better for us. And it actually makes us a little bit harder, and it actually contributes to us having better mental health. So I think that's more so the difference that I saw is that there's a place, Maine, and there's plenty of places like this. Things move a little bit slower. People don't necessarily need as much external stimulation all the time. And with that, just from a gym culture perspective, people are just, because they don't need any more external stimulation, they create their own stimulation with going to the gym for a couple hours a day and putting in work. That's a good way to blow off some steam. Versus out here, people are looking at the gym as more so like, oh, well, I'm just going to the gym because I want to look good for this next event that I'm going to, or I'm going to this exclusive club and I'm going to this event and I need to fit into this thing. I need to get rid of this stubborn belly fat and this, that, and the fourth. So that's kind of part of it. It's definitely a lot more that goes into it. I'm pretty sure you'll probably see a little bit of it in Seattle, just because Seattle's kind of a similar type city to San Francisco. I think it's a little bit more laid back than SF, but I think it's very similar in certain ways as well.
And it's interesting though. I think, success kind of leaves clues, but I think there's different, I guess, goals and aims. And I think you just touched on a big thing that, like money is, one dimension. And I think a lot of people that, you mentioned, it's like they may have had this target. And, I think a lot of times, when you see people who are successful in different domains, right? So you could say, I'll give like different examples, right? You could have someone who's successful financially, maybe in a business realm. You might have a stockbroker type that's successful financially. You might have a sales type that's successful financially. You could have a doctor type. And, then you think of a successful athlete. But if you notice, almost every person that reaches a certain level in those fields, they all take on a certain almost ethos. Like it's like it becomes, you almost have to be that person to succeed in that domain. And it's funny too. I think that's a big thing that I think kind of the younger kids watching this is like, be careful of what you make your goals, because, you might have a goal that you achieve, but that's the worst thing that could have happened to you. It's like, do you actually want that kind of lifestyle? And, it's kind of interesting too, I guess, even if you want to think about in the dating realm, you could have someone who's, I guess you could say, hyper successful as a single person dating versus you could say, another person's a hyper successful family person, right? They've got a big family and, they're close and they've got, deep roots versus, someone who might be successful as, a playboy. And you'll notice those types also take on different personas, right? If you found like the best at, the best family, the top 10, family men in the world, and you took the top 10 playboys, I would bet, they're very similar, right? Because, to reach different skill levels at different things in life, it's like you have to almost embrace that that pursuit. And so I think, that's I think a good piece of advice is like be careful where you're aiming at, because and look at the top and say, hey, is that where I want to end up? And because a lot of it's kind of a dark place. Because I actually think about that too when it comes to like weightlifting. At the highest level, it's surrounded with a lot of people that have injuries and they're taking drugs and they're there's a lot of negativity along a lot of different paths. And you got to be careful. I think what you aim at is actually what you're going to be content with in the end, because sometimes it's like it's too late. By the time you arrive at your goal, it's like you're already too deep into it to even get out.
Yeah, and another thing is like I like that example that you made about it's like two completely different ends of the spectrum. You got somebody who's a super successful playboy, and then you have somebody who's a super successful family man. So my first thought when it came to that, and this is actually another thing that I thought about, the difference between being in a place versus like Maine versus being in a place like San Francisco, or even being in a place like Hawaii or something like that versus being in a place like San Francisco, is that there's really a different mentality. I would say San Francisco is a quantity over quality type of place. And granted, you can think to yourself like, oh, there's people here with money, so they're going to want quality things. But the thing about it is, no matter if they have quality things, they want more. They always want more things. And that's a trap, to basically needing all this external stuff to fulfill you. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't fulfill you. Same thing when it comes down to quantity over quality, when it comes down to women. If you're a player and you think that this quantity of women is going to be fulfilling to you, you're in for a rude awakening. Once you actually go down that path and actually find out that no matter how many women you get, it doesn't. It's like feeding a bottomless pit, because you're never going to have enough, because there's never going to be enough women to actually fulfill you, opposed to somebody who maybe builds a family. That is something that can be fulfilling. So you have to think of that's a quality over quantity mentality, versus the playboy has the quantity over quality mentality. Same thing with somebody who's satisfied with just having a few nice things, who's on more of a minimalist type hype. I'm not saying that you need to be extreme in any aspect of life, but I will say that quality over quantity is an important lesson to learn. And it's easy to get caught up into the whole quantity mindset as well, because when you live in a place like this, and we're obviously affected by our environments, and you see a lot of people who have a quantity of money, or maybe you see this guy and he's always got a different, it's funny actually, because there's a guy at the gym who I see all the time, and I bumped into this dude like like three times outside of the gym, and every time I've been outside of the gym, he's seen me with a different woman. So in his mind, he looks at that as like, oh man, this dude, he's got all these women, and it's like he's like messaging me. He's like, oh man, I want you to introduce me to some girls or whatever. And in my mind, I was thinking to myself, I'm like, he actually saw me when I was on like 2 dates that weren't really good at all. Number one, 2 of the times it was like dates that like I really had a bad time, and then he just saw me when I was with this one chick who I kind of was seeing for a while. So it's like his thought process when he saw his I'm not going to say he was jealous of me, but he was like, oh, that's a great thing. He thought that was something that he wanted, but you don't even really know what goes into it. When in all reality, in my mind, I could be saying like, oh, I'm going on all these dates with all these women. I just want to find like a good girl who I can kind of like chill with, but I'm getting all this quantity, and I really just want some quantity. And from the outside looking in, somebody might look at it and be like, oh man, this dude must be having tons of fun. You know what I mean? So you got to be careful for, just like James said, be careful for what you wish for. Mike Ben 30 says, I hate that I missed the beginning of the live. Glad to see you guys back. Good to see you too, brother. And yeah, actually, we're gonna have probably end this live pretty soon. So I'll answer a couple questions. If you guys got a couple questions, or me and James will answer a couple questions. Mo Stellar says, how to keep pushing calisthenics training during winter. Pull-ups feel so slow. Do you have to accept that progress will slow down? I wouldn't say that you have to accept that progress will slow down. Like I said, you could get a doorway pull-up bar. You can get some parallettes. You can put those in your house. You can get some dip bars, put them in the house, and you can progress like crazy in calisthenics. To be honest with you, a home setup can do wonders for you. And if you're going to the gym, I don't really see any reason for you not to progress in calisthenics. And depending on where you're living at, like I made a commitment to myself coming back from Maine, because one of the other ways I've got some perspective is that winters are harsh on the East Coast. I'm like basically a privileged person living on the West Coast. And I'm thinking to myself, before I went to Maine, I was thinking to myself, like, oh, it's 50, 60 degrees. Like, man, that's too cold to be outside training. I'm going to stay in the gym. I went to Maine. I went for a run when it was like 25 degrees outside. That gave me a whole different perspective. My fingers was freezing. My toe couldn't feel my toes. I was like, I'm gladly training some 55-degree weather in San Francisco, and I'll do that shirtless and won't even trip off of it. So, you got to have that perspective. So if you're living in a place where you can go to the park, where it's not like super, super outrageously cold, I would say you can still make progress outside too. You probably, as far as like getting as much walking in and movement in, I think that naturally might come to, that might slow down in the winter seasons.
Yeah, man. And honestly, being in the cold, like, I think the rest periods are a little bit different. It's like, because, when I'm going heavy, like in the summertime, like, I take my time in between sets. But when it's cold out, like, you might want to be, do a set of pull-ups and, walk around and then do another set, not,
yeah,
sitting down.
Yeah, you're not going to want to sit there and just get freezing, because your body's going to get cold. That rest break might come back to haunt you. Mike Ben says, constant desire and wanting more causes so many to be discontent. That desire for more and comparison is causing a lot of bipping in the Bay, I heard. Comparison is a killer. It's definitely causing a lot of bipping out here. I mean, to be honest with you, I thought about getting a car out here, but it's like you almost can't even. I don't have like my apartment doesn't have a parking garage. So to me, if I was going to have a car, I'd have to leave it on the street. And it's like, it's pretty much guaranteed that you're going to get bipped out here. They're going to break into your car. Even if you don't have anything in it, they're going to break into your car. That's how crazy it is out here. And, I've said this many times before on this channel, is like comparison is the thief of joy. So always looking at what other people have. And granted, like, man, we're always going to look at what other people have. So we just have to remind ourselves that what we need is going to come to us in life. And I'm a firm believer in that. I actually had a good conversation with my boy G about this the other day. And we were just talking about my dating life. And he was just telling me, he's like, dude, you're like you're doing way too much with the dating. Like you are dating too many women at once. And it's like an unsustainable thing. Like, he's like, I don't even know how you even do it. But anyways, he was just saying like, and even not even necessarily just in a dating realm, but there's like so many things that I want to accomplish out here. And I think he even sensed me getting impatient in a lot of different ways, as far as opening up my own gym, as far as this, as far as that. And I'm like, I have all these things that I want. And I'm like, I want it to happen right now. I want to find a cool chick right now. And I'm tired of like all this other shit. So I need to continue to like filter out the process and keep dating all these women. But in all reality, my boy G kind of gave me the kind of like the confidence to like sit back a little bit, because when you sit back and you let things come to you, typically that's when the quality stuff comes to you. It's like, let me sit back and just let that, because G was just like, dude, he's like, dude, the type of person that you are, the type of woman that you need is just going to come to you. You don't need to look for it. It's not something that you need to look for. Those things actually come to you in life. And granted, this is something that I've actually experienced plenty of times in life, is when I'm not looking for things, the right things tend to come and land on your lap, to be completely honest with you. It's almost crazy how that works, but you almost have to have faith in that process. And another thing is like focusing on yourself more tends to breed that as well.
Yeah, man. I think for dating, like, if you're, I guess if you're viewing it like, in terms of, hookups versus like, finding something sustainable, it's like, success is going to be defined completely different. And I think, that's something I went through back when I was, single a few years back. I think like 2019 was, I think, when I was kind of getting too much into dating. And the thing is, I think, and I don't know if you're going through the same thing, but it's like, you basically know this character and you're like, if I play this character, I'm going to get the goods. And it basically, it's like, it basically prevents you from, actually developing like a sustainable relationship, because, you basically know like, hey, if I act like this, I already know she's going to be interested in, the one night stand. And so I'm not going to waste my time, like, um, for example, saying something that, they might not like, right? Or something where it's like, how would I say it? It's like, too, like, you're, say for example, like, you like training, 7 days a week, and you're like, I know you judge, I think you told me a story, someone ate McDonald's and you're like, that turned me off. Right.
Yeah.
But if you're on like a first date and you're just like, you just want to have, one night, you're not going to be judging, that type of lifestyle. Cause, to be honest, people that are into kind of short-term food gratification tend to be into short-term, physical gratification. So
Yeah.
those things kind of go hand in hand.
They intertwine. Yeah, for sure. And then another thing is like typically one thing I've noticed is like a lot of women who typically are more so into like the short term hookup type culture are actually into like more of quote unquote toxic traits. So the more you play into that toxic role, the more it's like, oh, I like him, you know, you know what I mean? So, and granted, like you said, that's not really something, that's not who I want to be. And, the funny thing is like, I actually sat back and thought about it. And, I was talking to somebody about this the other day and I was saying, when you're dating, you have to realize that 99% of the people out there are not going to be for you. And that's actually a good thing. That's not a bad thing. That's a good thing. It's a good thing to be picky. So at the end of the day, a lot of times if you're putting the right type of energy out there and you're not playing a character, you're not playing a role, then the right type of people are going to come back to you, because energy attracts energy. So
yeah, I actually heard this from someone. I think it was, I didn't follow the advice at the time, but I remember, they're basically saying like, there's going to be people that you're not compatible with at all, but, you kind of want to use for physical gratification, and you shouldn't do that. If you don't respect someone, like, and, looking back, I'm like, that was such a brilliant piece of advice they gave me. Because if you don't respect someone, you have no business like messing with them, like physically. Like, if you wouldn't say anything like, positive, you're like, this person has the worst moral character. Like, I think this, but, there's, physical attraction is like, and as men, it's hard to let that go when you're single, right? It's like you naturally are just like, he's a terrible person, but hey, I'm not marrying. You know.
Yeah, exactly. But you know what the funny thing about that is, like, and dude, there's just so many different like roads that you can go down with this topic, because a lot of times when you start comparing yourself to other people, or you start thinking about what other people, you can't let what other people do dictate how you move. And I feel like for me, I've kind of like let myself kind of let what's going on out here, or the dating culture out here, kind of dictate how I move. Because, granted, I'm 38 years old. I've had plenty of experiences. I don't need to have a bunch of short term, like, casual experiences. That's not really something, that's not where I'm at in life. So I can't look at, oh, well, everybody else is having fun, let me get in on the action. It's just like, no, I need to really stay true to myself and work on the things that I need to work on. And then the right person who's moving in the same energy. Everybody, like, it's funny because I would say that San Francisco has this non-monogamous element to dating out here, because everybody's dating multiple people at the same time, but everybody's not doing that. But there, even if you would say 80% of the people out here are doing that, not 100% of the people are doing that. So you are going to find somebody who maybe dates the way you want to date in a city like San Francisco. The overall culture might not be for you, but there's going to be people who are on the same wavelength, who are here for certain reasons, or maybe here for, whatever, for whatever reason. So, it just takes time, but it takes a little bit more time to find quality. And, that's just something that we all have to kind of understand, that the good things don't come instantly. It takes time to develop. Now, good. Mike Ben has a lot of stuff to say. Income equality, inequality is wild. I've heard. I still think the Bay is one of the most unique and interesting places in the country. Definitely would agree with you on that. It's very a lot of inequality with the income, but it is a very unique spot, and it's definitely an interesting place for anybody to visit. I know a dude a little older than you said it took him 76 dates, 76 women to find a quality woman he stayed with for a long time. I mean, I don't think there's necessarily a number behind it, but I do think that, it takes meeting people. And I would say that I would hope that it doesn't take 76 dates, 76 different women. But I mean, at the same time, shit, it could. I tried rushing the dating process and ended up with a fine woman with little to no character, and it was empty for sure. You definitely can't just base things off of looks. And that's the thing about when you actually get to know somebody versus just going strictly for. That's the thing about the dating apps, is that it's all based on looks. There's literally no, because you're not, who's actually reading the profiles. I'm not. I mean, you know what I mean. I'm just like, up, I did it. I'll click. We'll see what she's talking about when I actually meet her in person. And Mike Ben, where do you find the balance through between putting in effort in a dating and letting things come to you? Closed mouths don't get fed, but pressing too tough doesn't work either. So I would say this has been my theory of how I'm going to move forward as far as dating. As far as closed mouths don't get fed, for sure, but that's the reason why you have to hunt for your own food. For instance, I think putting yourself in an environment that you like to be in and meeting somebody in that environment. Granted, could I do that at the gym, since that's something I'm passionate about, but I also work there. So I'm typically very cautious about the type of where I let things go with women who I meet at my job. So that's something that I'm like not necessarily trying to go down that route. But at the same time, I also am somebody who likes to frequent cafes. And, a lot of times, for instance, yesterday, I did have an opportunity to actually meet somebody, but I was editing some videos and I really wasn't even in that type of mindset. Me and this girl were kind of exchanging looks back and forth. And she seemed like, I don't know anything about her, but just the fact that she was sitting still in the cafe knitting told me something about her, opposed to, like, you know what I mean? Like, granted, that seems like such a odd thing to think about, but I thought about it and I'm just like, anybody who can sit in a cafe and knit for 2 hours is not necessarily looking for constant stimulation, because it takes somebody to actually have a little bit more of like patience and like just not wanting to constantly be running around doing this and doing that. So I think that's probably the problem I think I've had with a lot of women out here, is that they're always looking for stimulation through different men, through events, through this, through that, and they don't sit still. And the one chick who I was dating, who I've probably been dating the most out here, she's constantly doing shit. And it's like, for me, that was kind of the thing that kind of turned me off about her. It was like, she never sits still. And seeing somebody who's just sitting there knitting, I was like, okay, that's cool. If I see her in here again, maybe I'll say something to her. But at the end of the day, you don't, there's, this city has so many women. It's not even really, all it takes is for you to say hi and start up a conversation. So it's not necessarily, I'm a firm believer in speaking to people, starting conversations, and seeing how things go. You know what I mean? And things will take care of themselves. So I think closed mouths don't get fed. So if you want to actually meet somebody, you have to actually, be open to meeting somebody. Yeah, I mean, that's just part of the process. Well, I'm gonna answer these last few questions, and then uh Yasho Bomb says, "Oh shiznits, what's going on? What's going on, brother? If you just joined in, you can kind of watch this on the playback. And let's see. I only want a righteous woman who's modest and believes and loves the Creator. I can't just take any woman. Well, I would say it's going to be hard to find a woman in San Francisco if those are your requirements. But but anyways, I mean, I'm just being real. This is not necessarily like a very like spiritual city like that. So I think it's more so a superficial type spot. So I'm not saying that you can't find the right type of person here, but you can. You could find a righteous woman here. It's just take a little bit of work, and you got to be okay with things taking time. But anyways, guys, that's gonna be it. I actually got to head over to the farmers market. This is one of those things I do on a weekly basis. I like to go get fresh fruits and vegetables at the farmers market. One of the things that I strongly encourage any of you guys out there to do. I'm somebody who doesn't really like to frequent grocery stores, major grocery stores. I'd rather buy my stuff fresh from the source. And if I can't get it fresh from the source, I get it from a farmer's market because they get it fresh from the source. But anyway, guys, hope you guys are doing great out there. Me and James will try to tap in with you guys maybe next week, maybe the following week, depending on what both of our schedules are like. And yeah. And if you guys are watching this, like the video. You guys are watching this on the playback, like the video as well. Holla at you guys later. Peace.